Don't let that dream pass from your mind, baby. Children dream. That's what they say. You know it's just a matter of time, baby. We'll scheme on.
There's one thing that I know now that I wish I would have been taught in medical school is the power of diet and lifestyle to reverse disease. Like we knew about preventive medicine, right? You diet and exercise, take care of yourself, don't smoke, and you can lower your risk of these bad things happening, right? Put on your seatbelt, smoke alarms, just all that thing. But what we've only recently come to understand is that no, since these are lifestyle diseases, you can actually treat these diseases with lifestyle, without pills and procedures, right? Actually treat them, and actually they work better in many cases than our armamentarium of pills and scalpels.
Yeah, taking a step back, it's really shocking to me that there is very little, if not no nutritional education while you're a medical student. I think perhaps we had maybe half a day that touched on the topic, but none of it was really big picture material. We weren't really thinking about the role that nutrition played in terms of causing disease or even reversing heart disease. And not just heart disease, really, it's much broader than that.
I don't really think the central core of what the medical school curriculum is focused on lifestyle medicine. They're not really teaching people to do physical therapies or to do exercise therapy or do nutritional therapies. They're mostly looking at therapeutic interventions like medications and surgeries. So it's almost like the whole medical profession is studying and to become experts in a different field outside of nutrition. But, the postman doesn't know about nutrition either. Your lawyer doesn't know a lot about nutrition. The school teachers don't know a lot about nutrition. The person driving your car doesn't know a lot about nutrition. What I'm saying here is that I'm suggesting that nutrition should be taught in grade school, in high schools, in colleges, in medical, not just in medical schools. It should be common knowledge across, because it's the most important information that people need to control their health and their destiny.
So the one thing I would have liked to have known at medical school, and that I hope that every medical student learns through their journey in medical school, is that it is possible to prevent and reverse some of our biggest killers through lifestyle choices, particularly a whole food plant-based diet.
When people eat a lot of animal products, particularly meat-based protein, your arteries are more likely to get clogged, your arteries are more likely to constrict, the arteries are more likely to get clogged up with plaque and other things. You get chronic inflammation, which is an underlying cause of so many chronic diseases. Your risk of premature death from pretty much everything goes up correspondingly. And yet when you go on a plant-based diet, you're really getting a double benefit, because not only are you not eating the things that are disease promoting, but you're getting literally hundreds of thousands of other substances that are protective.
We were taught so much about anatomy and physiology, cellular biology, pharmacology, medical subspecialties, communication skills, consult skills. There was just so much to cover. But we never talked about prevention. We were told that we had to encourage people to have a diet that was healthy and a lifestyle that was healthy, get them exercising, but there was really no how and there was no what. And I think, Bishop Desmond Tutu said that at some point you've got to stop just pulling people out of the river when they fall in. You've got to go upstream and figure out why they fell in the first place. And I think that medical education really needs to do that. I think things are changing, but it's a slow process.
We spend more money in this country than any other country in the world on healthcare, and we don't have better outcomes. So somebody has to stop and say, what is going on here?
We spend more money on healthcare than any other country in the world. We represent 5% of the world's population, but take 75% of the prescription drugs, and yet we have one of the shortest longevity of any of the civilized countries.
If I was in charge of medical school education, the nutritional component would be front and center. I think that on their very first lecture that they receive as med students would focus on a whole food plant-based lifestyle as potentially or very likely the most powerful modality that they will have in their toolkit for helping patients to heal from whatever chronic illnesses they have, or better yet, prevent chronic illnesses from developing in the first place.
So if you follow me on social media, you know that this is a big push button issue for me. I feel really strongly about medical education and how much we don't learn about nutrition. In the United States, the average medical student has only 19 hours of nutrition education over 4 years. And as a US trained MD, that was barely what I got. And in those 19 hours of nutrition education, most of our education was focused on things that weren't really applicable to the real world. We never learned about plant-based diet. I don't even know if we learned about Mediterranean diet. I pretty much remember learning about scurvy and rickets and things that we actually don't treat on a day-to-day basis. But the truth is nutrition's so important. It's the, basis of so much of the chronic disease that we see every single day in the hospital. In my internal medicine residency training for all 3 years and for the 80 hours a week that I worked, we had zero nutrition education. And as a cardiology fellow, before I graduate, I have to complete 100 catheterizations, but 0 hours of nutrition training. And I'm treating heart disease on a daily basis. So this is really important to me. I think this is something that needs to be addressed on a national level. I think that nutrition education and evidence-based nutrition needs to be integrated into the medical schools. Starting from the first day of medical school, it needs to be part of the curriculum, and it's just not at this time. So I don't think that it's accurately represented now for medical students.
Only a quarter of medical schools deliver what the federal requirements are, which is 25 hours over 4 years, which is essentially nothing. But we're working, there are medical schools out there that are becoming very aware and are making modifications to their curriculum. But this has to be something that we do across the board nationally, not just nationally, but internationally. So my hope is that 10, 20 years from today, we will have all doctors understand the importance of plant-based lifestyle. Imagine if we had a world where we had doctors that can all speak to this universally and ubiquitously. We could turn the tide of this chronic illness epidemic. And I hope I have the opportunity to witness that.
I chose to go to the school with the most nutrition training of any other school in the United States. The Tufts University School of Medicine, they have a school of nutrition there. But that was just 24 hours of nutrition training. So that's out of thousands of hours of preclinical instruction, just 24 hours. And so, I mean, that really, it speaks to how little priority, kind of the medical model gives to preventive medicine, to lifestyle medicine, using these lifestyle approaches like diet and exercise to not only prevent, but reverse disease.
I think that medical students are not trained in nutrition because the medical education and the medical paradigm hadn't caught up with this rising epidemic of lifestyle diseases, of chronic diseases. I think more and more physicians and doctors and dietitians are now realizing how important nutrition is in reversing chronic medical conditions. So there is a change happening, but as always, it takes a while for research to translate into clinical practice.
I was reading on the American Medical Association's website that the AMA actually recommends nutrition training. And also, I read on the website that the average medical student starts medical school expecting to get nutrition education, and by the time the student is finished with his education is usually pretty disappointed that he didn't get more. Last time I checked, Tufts University had the best nutrition program for doctors. It involved 17 classroom hours, and every other medical school was worse than that. Well, why is this? I think the first thing is that the way that medicine is taught, it's basically taught with the idea of using drugs and procedures to address symptoms of disease, not to address the cause of disease, which, let's face it, most of our chronic degenerative diseases are what we would consider foodborne illnesses. They're diet related. So doctors have always felt, well, if there's something nutritionally that needs to be done for this person, then we would refer them to a dietitian. And doctors also think, and I don't think they think this through very well, that when a patient starts to become overweight and develop early signs of diabetes, they say, well, you ought to lose some weight and clean up your diet a little bit, maybe not understanding that those instructions are not specific enough to really help somebody change their health in a meaningful way with diet. So All in all, medical training is designed to teach doctors how to prescribe drugs and how to perform procedures, not much in the way of preventing disease or treating disease at the cause level, which is diet.
Doctors, when they graduate from medical school, they just don't have the tools, you know? They're brilliant minds. They're altruistic, they want to help people, they go into it with the right intentions. And they're generally very motivated to want to actually help. It's just that they're carpenters with really poor tools, right? So they have this toolbox, and inside this toolbox are a bunch of dull tools that don't really do anything, and therefore as a result of that, they look to better tools, and those better tools that they're given access to are pharmaceutical medication. So that's the problem. What we got to do is take a step backwards and say, okay, let's get nutrition education in medical school. Number one, it has to be board certified. Period, end of story. If you are taking a nutrition class for interest, okay, great. If you're taking it because you're excited about it, okay, great. If it's not a board certified subject, doctors are not going to learn it, because what they're worried about is passing the board exams and doing as much work as they possibly can to graduate from medical school. So it has to be board certified, number one. Number two, it has to be evidence-based. There's too much nutrition which is being taught right now to registered dietitians and to nutritionists, which is not evidence-based. This information dates back to the 1970s, and they teach people, professionals to encourage their patients to consume more dairy products. We know as a group of clinicians and a group of researchers that eating more dairy is not the solution to any disease, and in fact it actually accelerates chronic disease risk. Number two, without an evidence-based education, it's like shooting in the dark, right? The world of nutrition education is really complicated. And you can go into the evidence, the scientific literature, and you can find an association between practically any two variables you're looking for. But just because you find an article that says that you eating more mayonnaise can reduce your diabetes risk does not make it true. So it's very important that clinicians are taught how to sift through the evidence-based research, and then they're presented with evidence-based research that actually makes sense. And if and only if that happens and it becomes a board-certified subject, then we're actually going to progress as a society.
Not a single medical school in the United States is really teaching nutrition. A few are offering some lectures, if you will, but it's not the kind of nutrition that I believe is the real nutrition. So doctors or medical students, if you will, are not being trained in this subject. That's one point. The second point is, of the 130 or so medical specialties, that's the mechanism for supporting reimbursement. Not one is called the Institute of Nutrition. That's really a sad commentary. And so, if the medical community doesn't really accept this nutritional science thing as a medical science, then they can't do much with it, especially if they can't get reimbursed. And by introducing the idea of nutrition, get that right, well, it just so happens that the nutritional effect comes from plants.
And there's been a basic covenant of trust since the days of Hippocrates, that whenever possible, the caregiver will share with the patient what is the causation of their illness. And sadly today, in cardiovascular medicine, that's not happening. Not through any malice of forethought on the part of a cardiologist, it's just that they have never had any training in nutrition, either during medical school or during their cardiovascular training. So it really is pretty dismal to think that we have created a specialty to take care of this disease, and they do not understand the causation of the illness.
The number one killer in the United States is the American diet. Number one cause of disability in the United States is the American diet, according to the Global Burden of Disease Study, the largest study of disease risk factors in human history, according to funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So, if the number one cause of death and disability is our diet, then obviously nutrition is the number one thing taught in medical school, right? It's the number one thing your doctor talks about at every single visit. Right? There's this disconnect, right, between the science and the practice of mainstream medicine. It makes me think of like the 1950s when doctors were still puffing on cigarettes. Most doctors smoked. No wonder they weren't telling their patients to quit.